Hey everyone. The Middle Ages is divided into two periods, the Dark Ages and the Gothic period. This lecture is going to focus on the first half, the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages is a time from the fall of Rome in the West in 476 CE, and the Crusades is generally referred to as the Dark Ages from 6th century to the 11th century. These 5 centuries were marked by wars, invasions, and upheavals, which plunged the people of Western Europe into total chaos and an absence of a centralized government. The term Dark Ages, however, does not mean that there was absolutely nothing of civilized culture occurring. During this era, the Christian church was a principal source of education and culture. The church had great powers and influence and rivaled or sometimes controlled any existing form of civil government. Enthusiasm from the legalization of practicing Christianity began the building of grand cathedrals. The map that you're looking at here in the video just highlights areas of the period with dense population in red, areas of moderate population in yellow, and red and blue lines indicate major land, sea, and trade routes of that time. So during the Dark Ages, there were two major centers of design. The work centered in the Eastern Empire is called Byzantine, after the cultural center of Byzantium. This might not be a name that you know, because Byzantium was later renamed Constantinople by the Roman Emperor Constantine, and today it's known as the city of Istanbul in Turkey. The work centered in the Western Empire is called Romanesque and will come to dominate medieval Europe. Sancta Sophia, the image in the slide, is the largest and most spectacular of the Byzantine churches. Emperor Justinian commissioned the Sancta Sophia, which means holy wisdom, in 532 CE. With the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453, Justinian's church became a mosque and was renamed Hagia Sophia. Now, today, you see still a quartet of 4 minarets, which are the tall, thin towers that you see in the 4 corners that were added around it when it became a mosque. On the interior, you'll see a lot of other additions that are from its time as a mosque. When Christianity became an officially accepted religion, again, it was legalized by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 313 CE. The new Christian churches needed to be designed for large congregations, as opposed to before when they were meeting in secret places. For this reason, designers adapted the Roman building style for public meetings and courtrooms called the basilica, and thus the early Christian Basilican Church. The Basilican Church is characterized by bilateral symmetry in its design. Bilateral symmetry means you could essentially take it and fold it in half, and it's a mirror image on both sides. It focuses on an altar, usually placed at the east end for the congregation to face east or toward the Holy Land. The space is defined by a high central nave for gatherings and processions. At the far end of the nave is an apse. The apse, A-P-S-E, if you're wondering how that's spelled, is the altar for clergy to conduct Mass from. Sometimes, and in this example, the apse also had a partially enclosed area for a chancel or choir area. On one or both sides of the nave are aisles for the public to gather and observe any kind of processional coming down the nave. It's also a place for small shrines or sort of secondary functions. The nave, which is actually higher than the aisles on either side, is lit by clear story windows. So you can see those clear story windows allowing light to pour into the center of the space because it's higher than the outside spaces. The walls are constructed by masonry, which are blocks of stone held together by mortar. The roof is spanned by large wooden trusses. The upper walls of the nave are supported by rows of columns. So look along the two sides. You see the rows of columns. Those columns would either carry straight lintels or, in this case, arches. This makes a clear separation between the nave and the aisles on the outsides. Floors are tiled with colored stones and geometric patterns. Stone columns, which are frequently marble, were based on the Roman orders. And if you look closely, you could actually identify that the ones in this picture are of the Corinthian order. Sometimes the columns were taken directly from the Roman temples. Walls above the columns were often painted. The half dome at the far end above the apse was usually painted or mosaic tiled in religious themes. An alternate building plan used all of the same design elements, but in radial symmetry. So instead of bilateral symmetry, that it's in the round or an octagonal floor plan that typically focuses on a centrally located baptism fountain, altar, or perhaps a tomb. Much later, in the 10th to 11th centuries, we see another floor plan arise called the Greek cross plan. It's shown in this example from San Marco in Venice. The interior is still characterized by the basilican style design elements. Again, an adaptation of the Roman building style for public meetings and courtrooms called the basilica. So, alternatively, we had the Romanesque design style. This took basic ideas from ancient Rome, but most of the Romans' architectural advancements were lost and forgotten during this period. They did, however, maintain several elements. The first one is the semicircular arch. It's the most advanced structural technique still in use from the Roman times. In Romanesque design, the semicircular arches run the length of the nave. So the barrel vault is the second, which is actually an interpretation on the semicircular vault. It is a simple vault of stone made by repeating the semicircular arches in a line and connecting them together, creating a barrel vault. This was used in place of the Byzantine design wooden truss ceilings, which you saw in the earlier examples where you just had triangular wooden trusses. A third is the groin vault. So it's a little bit more of a complex vaulting system, also made of stone, and it's made by two intersecting barrel vaults. So if you took one barrel vault in this direction, the other barrel vault in this direction, where they intersect, it would create what we're calling here a groin. You can see the X of the groin where the two barrel vaults essentially cross over in the picture in the slide. Here's a few extra diagrams just to illustrate the differences in medieval vault styles. So on the top left, you see the barrel vault, which is basically just sort of the extension of semicircular arches. On the top right, you see the groin vault, which I talked about as being two barrel vaults crossing over each other. On the bottom left, you see a rib vault, which is an adaptation to the groin vault. And on the right, you see the fan vault, which again is an adaptation to the groin vault, but essentially just smooths out that area where there is a groin from the two barrel vaults crossing. So in Romanesque design, we often see a narthex added to the building. It's a two-story vestibule to the main building. It's a major space added to the west end of the church, so the end opposite of the basilican apse. It's almost a complete building in itself. The picture on the right is the west elevation of the narthex on Saint Philibert Abbey in France. The floor plan on the top left shows the narthex on the far left or west side, added to the traditional basilican floor plan. Transepts and towers are placed symmetrically at each end of the basilican nave. So you can see in the bottom left picture the roof of the nave connecting two towers. The apse end with a tower above it is on the left, and the narthex end with a tower above it is on the right. So Romanesque style also got translated. Here it's translated into the Scandinavian design using their own vernacular building material of wood instead of stone. These are called stave churches. They're usually very small in comparison to the European versions. It is generally regarded that this design style turned up in Scandinavia due to Christian monks traveling from Europe to convert the Norse Vikings to Christianity. This example is a triple nave stave church. It is one of only 28 surviving Norwegian stave churches. So, moving away from religious structures, during the Dark Ages, the structure of society was based on a feudal system. Feudalism is a political and military system between a feudal aristocrat, a lord, and his vassals, or his subjects. The system works with power controlling the people from the top down, or from the lords, the warrior nobility, who have legal and military obligations to one another, down to the vassals, and further down to the serfs or peasants. With constant warfare, architectural design and life in general was focused around maintaining strong defenses. This translated to building sturdy walls around houses, making it a castle, or building sturdy walls around a whole town or city to secure the citizens from invasion. The feudal lord who lived in a castle would offer protection to the lower classes living within the town walls. Interior design of castles of this time generally consists of an all-purpose main room called the hall, which served as the living and dining room for the owner, his family, and servants. Private rooms for the family and servant spaces were added very slowly over time. Walls in castles were typically bare stone, possibly whitewashed. Floors were also bare stone or bare wooden boards. Ceilings were structural wood. In the center of the hall, you might have a hearth for a fire. And windows were tiny, thin slits for two reasons of protection. One, there's no glass available to keep out the weather. And two, you would not want large openings if you were being attacked or robbed. At one end of the hall, you would see a raised portion of the floor called the dais, D-A-I-S. The dais is where the family and honored guests would sit at a table. From the dais, the lord could retreat to the privacy of his chamber if he had a separate one. Again, the fire in the Great Hall was used for both heating and cooking. It was built on the stone or brick floor in the middle of the room. The smoke filled the room until it made its escape through a door, window, or a hole in the roof. It wasn't until much later, during the 14th century, that the fire was moved from the center of the hall to a side wall and giving it a projecting hood that was built over to direct the smoke out either through a wall hole or a chimney. The projecting hood was frequently decorated with architectural forms or carved coats of arms. Chairs or benches and a small rug were frequently placed before the fire. It was at this time that the fireplace and hearth became a symbol of home. Surviving furniture from the Middle Ages is rare. Most knowledge comes from manuscripts, carved reliefs, and a few remaining pieces. This wooden relief shows the function of the Great Hall as a place for gatherings and daily living. The table of honor was set at the end of the room. Above the seats of the lords of the castle hung a tapestry. Benches or chests were lined up against the long walls and at mealtimes. Smaller movable tables called trestle tables would be set up to accommodate these extra guests. Here we see a trestle table. They're called this because they are made of boards set up on trestles. It's a very portable solution. Think of it like a pretty makeshift table, laying a big board or like a door across two sawhorses. Chests were a common furnishing made of simple box construction. They would hinge and locked to contain your valuables. Chairs were very rare, but if they did exist, they were modified from chest boxes to incorporate a high back. They were used primarily as a symbolic object by the lord of the castle, showing his authority, and others would just sit on the chests or benches with cushions placed on top. The high backs of the chairs were used to establish not only a hierarchy as a symbolic gesture, but also to retain heat. Tapestries became status symbols also among the aristocracy in the Middle Ages. They're, they were also very practical by providing insulation for castle walls. You could use them to cover openings, give privacy around beds, things like that. Kings and nobles took them on their travels from castle to castle for reasons of comfort and prestige. Tapestries often changed hands after battle, and since the victor's door and window openings might be a different size, the acquired hangings might be cut or even joined together to another tapestry. A tapestry was an integral part of medieval and Renaissance interior decoration, especially in the large staterooms and great halls of royal residences. It provided decoration and a lavish display of wealth, and also kept out the cold and damp. Often, they would be used as wall hangings to illustrate scenes from a story like a courtly novel. The benefit of tapestries was that they could be rolled up and transported in the royal baggage train, fitting in perfectly with the transient lifestyle of the court. The powerful lord, who usually owned several castles, took all of his valuable possessions with him as he traveled from one castle to another. Most possessions were portable, and chests were used to carry cloths, tapestries, fabrics, cushions, etc. Only crudely made pieces, such as dining tables, beds, not including the fabrics, and such built in pieces, would be left behind in the castle. So, why would they take most of their things with them? This was so if a neighboring lord paid an unexpected visit to the castle in the owner's absence and decided to pillage it, there was very little left there to steal. Before glass was generally available, the covering for windows would have been thin horn, waxed paper, or oiled linen. These were secured with wooden lattice. When this was not available, vertical wooden bars set diagonally were spaced along the opening. Wooden shutters on the inside provided protection against the elements. During the reign of Henry VII, windows, instead of being considered part of the house, were considered part of the furnishing. The value can be shown in the fact that they were removed and stored in a secure place when the owners left town for extended periods. A gradual increase in the number of windows can be noted as glass became more available and less costly. Leading was typically required to make up windows from many small pieces of glass, so you see the leading keeping all the little pieces together. And lastly, curtains were not used at windows, but they were used around beds to create some form of privacy and space division between the rest of the living quarters. Curtains were simple panels of cloth with cloth or metal loops that hung from a rod, like a shower curtain. This would have only been available to aristocrats. So bear in mind, the design elements that we've talked about are from the upper classes, great halls and castles. The lower class, or serfs, would have lived in simple wooden box-like structures consisting of one room with a gable roof. The house would have also served as a barn, so people and animals shared common space with little separation. There would have been an open fire or possibly a masonry fireplace, but there was no glass for windows, so interiors were very dark spaces. Candlesticks became commonplace, but not until the later Middle Ages. So, thank you for following along, and I will see you next time in the second half of the Middle Ages.